Hello, and welcome to another edition of Ask the Professor, a crowd-powered feature. We depend on you for financial support to keep these videos coming. We also depend on you for the questions we answer on everything from economics to history, political philosophy, current events, culture, all those things that concern us in our attempt to build a good society together.
Including money. Here's one from Doug, and he says, does the fact that banks create money when they make loans cause the money supply to expand or contract? And does it cause public and private debt to expand inexorably? In other words, is debt inevitable?
I would answer that question yes, no, and no. And that's a fitting kind of response to a question about monetary policy, because monetary policy is exceedingly complicated. I have this theory, I was going to say I have a private theory, but I'm saying it into a camera, so I guess it's not that private, that central bankers don't actually understand money. They're very concerned about the money supply and how fast it's expanding, and they think that they know how to make it expand faster or more slowly, but they don't know what money is. They've got M1, M2, M4, M7, M16. Actually, I don't know if there's an M16 that's not a weapon, but they have all these different measures of money and they're not sure which one to use. And then they do things to the interbank lending rate, what they now use, and not what they predicted doesn't happen. And then they say, well, we better do it again because it'll happen next time for sure.
Politicians are like that.
They are, but these are central bankers.
Right.
And they've been holding the bank
better.
rate down. They've been trying to push interest rates down as low as they can ever since 2008 so the economy would revive. Well, interest rates are low, but the economy hasn't revived. There's something they don't know. That's as by way of preface. So, does the fact that banks create money when they make loans cause the money supply to expand? My first answer was yes, because there's more money after a bank makes a loan. But my second answer is no. And that's because what is interesting about monetary policy is not whether the money supply suddenly got $100,000 bigger because somebody had a mortgage approved. The question is, why does the money supply expand over time? How did we get to have so much more money in circulation today than we had in 1900 or in 1600 or in 49 BC? And critically, what causes the money supply to expand faster than the economy, if that's what's happening? Because if the money is growing faster than the economy is growing, you get inflation, and inflation is bad. Inflation is like the economic equivalent of rust, or it's a veil. And the thicker it gets, the higher inflation is, the less you can tell what things are really worth. I mean, if prices are going up 1% a year, everybody can cope with it. If they're going up 0.5% a year, everybody can cope with it. They just understand everything will be a little more expensive. But it starts going 10%, 20%, 40%, you're wondering when it's going to hit 100 or 200, or and in Zimbabwe, where it hit millions, and they had to abolish their own currency. So things like that can happen, and that doesn't happen because bank loans expand the money supply. Bank loans expand the money supply everywhere. It's what governments do over time that expands the money supply. And I remember years ago I went around asking people, how does this happen? And they would start talking about open market operations. That is, well, the government buys bonds, it puts money out there, and if the government sells bonds, it absorbs money. So that's how the money supply gets bigger or smaller. And I said, oh, come off it. That again could work over a period of months or maybe a year or two. But over a century, the government buy all the bonds there are and put out money in return. That doesn't begin to cover how much money actually is created. Well, it's the printing press. They're just actually printing more dollar bills, or nowadays they're printing dollar coins because they printed so many dollar bills it stopped being worth having paper dollars. That doesn't account for it either. You get these long periods of inflation that give a run of a century in which is inflation, as there was, in fact, in the century leading up to the Industrial Revolution, and then you get a period of relative price stability, and then you get more inflation. And obviously there are things that governments can do. But as we've learned since 2008, there doesn't seem to be anything they can do. They tried to expand the money supply by pushing interest rates to zero, and people wouldn't borrow. So all of this leaves rather a big question mark over why is it that sometimes there is inflation and sometimes there isn't. But it's not banks making loans, because they do that all the time and have since the invention of banking, and it just doesn't correlate with periods of high inflation or low inflation. Then finally, does it make debt inevitable? No. What makes debt inevitable is people borrowing money to buy things they couldn't afford if they didn't borrow. And sometimes it's prudent if you're doing something like getting a mortgage to buy a house, where you've calculated your ability to service the debt, and one day you'll have an asset that is worth more than you paid for it.
And that's more sensible than to wait until you have $400,000.
Yeah, or when companies will say, okay, I'm ordering a ton of paint because I'm in the construction business and I need paint, and I owe you for that, buddy. And then a month later, the bill comes in and they pay it. That's debt, but that's an absolutely rational way of conducting a business. It's when people get in over their heads. And partly it's happening to all of us because the government's holding interest rates down. They wanted us to borrow to stimulate the economy. We borrowed, it didn't stimulate the economy. Another government blunder. And partly it's governments because they always have a good credit rating, because almost always, because the theory is they can always squeeze it out of the populace in taxes. Now, of course, governments end up borrowing to the point that in order to take it out of the economy would destroy the economy and there'd be no tax base, and then they either go bankrupt or somehow pretend they didn't. Governments sometimes really go bankrupt, other times they fake it. But debt doesn't come from banks. Debt comes from borrowing. And to some extent, banks making loans that they shouldn't. They don't check people out properly. They get enthusiastic and start making subprime mortgage loans, that sort of thing. Banks creating money alarms people. But it's really quite a rational process whereby, the thing with the bank is they don't need to have enough money on hand if everybody came in and wanted to close their account and take it out. They just need enough to meet all the people who are likely to come in that day, and that includes if they've lent money to somebody and then other people want some of the money. They say, okay, now they owe us money, you give it to us. They just have to be prudent about how much they're carrying. Inflation comes from governments, and not even governments understand what they're doing with the money supply, so it's a little hard to tell. But by and large, it's when governments get so greedy that in order to take more out of the economy, when people won't pay more taxes, they have to basically debauch the currency. That's where it really comes from. Like most of our problems in life, it's government jiggery-pokery that's the problem here, not the sound operations of a commercial economy.
Right. And can I get just one thing off my chest? I don't like it when people think that you can explain economic matters very neatly into mathematical equations. The economy is a bunch of humans. Humans are messy. They're also sometimes quite silly. So the economy is just this mess of things, right? You can't explain it. You can't predict it. You can't make it do things.
Yeah, for 500 years, we've been trying to reduce everything to mathematics. It worked with chemistry, it worked with physics, it worked with optics. It didn't work with people, because we're not copper sulfate. And it's amazing that you have to say that over and over again. Look around you, people are not blue crystals, but you do.
All right. Thanks for that. Folks, if you would like to play along and ask your question of the professor, the URL on your screen will take you to a page where everything is explained. Thanks, and see you next time.